Well, welcome everybody to the continuing Distinguished Speaker Series sponsored by the Research Center for Child Wellbeing. Our next event is Friday, December 2nd at noon, right here. Dr. Joseph Ibrahim from UNC Chapel Hill, who's a highly engaging biostatistician. I bet you haven't heard those ones. He's an expert on analyses of clinical trials and missing data methodologies. We're really fortunate to have today's guest speaker, Dr. Anthony Biglan from the Oregon Research Institute, Eugene, Oregon. And if you haven't been to Eugene, it's a gorgeous small community with a lot of mountains and things nearby and ski resorts and things like that. I've known Tony for multiple decades. He's an individual who hasn't just excelled in one area. He's excelled in multiple domains, and those domains inform each other as opposed to having separate tracks. He has a long, well-published history in the area of applied behavior analysis as a researcher and a leader, applied to real issues and both at the individual level and at the community level. He's an international leader in prevention science, including being the past president of the Society for Prevention Research, and has recently, in the last several years, been involved with the National Prevention Science Coalition, which he and I both are engaged with. And he's also a public policy advocate and organizer. His most recent organizational activities involve a concept called values to action, and he'll tell you some about that. He's also a consummate researcher in his own right across different areas of work pertaining to children, adolescents, families, adults, and a very published author. Two of his recent books are really about what our society needs to do. One is called The Nurture Effect, How the Science of Human Behavior Can Improve Our Lives and Our World. And more recently, Rebooting Capitalism, How We Can Forge a Society That Works for Everyone. He's also an avid basketball player, a wine enthusiast, and an all-around nice guy. His talk today is, Can We Achieve a Nurturing Society? Tony Biglan.
Well, if I didn't know myself better, I'd be impressed. So I woke up at 5 a.m. and decided to make significant changes in my talk. And sent them to Taylor, and she's loaded them up. This is going to be interesting. It's an interesting day. I'm involved with some pretty interesting things. But let me just start by asking you this. Would you raise your hand if you think, if you are worried about what's going to happen next Tuesday? Okay. So let me get started and we'll see where we go. Here's where we're going to start. You all got your phones? Here's the question. What's your vision? If your community were the most wonderful community in South Carolina, what would people see? What would people hear? What would people be doing? And what would people feel? And I ask you to get out your phone. You're all tech savvy, you already took out your phones. And go to the website and just answer those questions. So while you're finishing that up, let me just tell you, what I want to talk about is the state of the nation. Then I'm going to talk about health disparities and the role of social determinants. Then I'm going to talk about the Nurture Consilience. And finally, I'm going to talk about how we can assist communities in becoming more nurturing. And hopefully we'll have a lot of discussion before the day is out. So let me first start with the state of the nation. This is a chart of the levels of poverty in this country over the last, since 1959. And I guess if I point here, okay, what you see is this is the level of poverty among people 65 and older, retired people, so to speak. And as you can see, it went way down. Any idea why it went down starting in 1965?
Medicare.
That's it.
I'm
No
honored
longer-
to have Medicare. I like it.
And Medicaid
Same
too.
here.
Medicaid also.
Yes, yes. And so we reduced poverty among people over 65. And then there's the age 18 to 64, and they've had lower levels of poverty. And then around 1975, the proportion of kids who are living in poverty began to go up and is now last 19.7%. And there's some people who will argue that we're overstating the level of poverty of children. But even if you accept their arguments, we have some of the highest levels of poverty of any economically developed country. Then there's economic inequality, where we're number one. We have the highest level of economic inequality of any economically developed country. And this is a chart of the relationship between an index of health and social problems. If we took 5 minutes to make a list of those, they're all in this, including premature death. And what you see is that countries that have low levels of economic inequality, like Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Japan, have very low levels of these problems. And once again, we're number one. And by the way, it's interesting, Finland, Norway, and Sweden have those low levels because they tax and return money to everybody. Japan actually has lower levels because they never got into massively raising the wealth of the very wealthy. Economic inequality is a huge risk factor for all kinds of problems. Robert Putnam published a book a few years ago called Our Kids, and he starts in his hometown in, I've forgotten the name of it, but it's on the Lake Erie in Ohio. And he describes the conditions there. And then he takes you all around the country and talks about how things have changed in the last 50 years. Well, he argues, and he shows documents that over the past 50 years, America has become far less nurturing of those who are poor. He describes his community when he was growing up there, where there was a lawyer living next to a working person and so on, people lived together and so on. He comes back 50 years later, and there's a gated community on the lake, and there's a highway, and there's a trailer park on the other side. And then he takes you to communities all over the country and shows just how much things have changed in the last 50 years. Economic inequality and poverty have increased greatly. Social mobility, the chance that a poor child will move out of poverty, has virtually disappeared. So many more families, schools, and neighborhoods lack basic conditions that nurture young people's development. There are fewer two-parent families. There's less adequate income, and parents don't have the time or the skills very often to nurture their children. Social capital has declined. He tells the story, there were 2 Black kids in his graduating class, and one was a young woman, and she and her mother would clean the house of a wealthy woman in the community. And one day the woman asked the girl where she was going to go to college. He said, "Oh, I'm not going to college." And so what Putnam describes is the woman puts on her furs and goes down to the principal and says, "You've got to get her and send her to some of these schools and get her into college." And subsequently, she went to college. She got a master's degree. She worked and ended up working in education in Los Angeles and had a very successful life. But this is an example of what Putnam has always been interested in, which is the social connections and the degree to which when people know each other, they can help each other. And if you live next to a lawyer and you maybe were a working stiff, you still got some help because you knew this lawyer. Well, now with gated communities and so on, we're segregated according to income to a much greater extent than we were. And so many people lack the social capital that they used to have. Then the schools with guidance and extracurricular activities, there's massive differences in schools in terms of the degree to which they have or don't have those things. And he documents the way in which extracurricular activities are hugely important. You've got places where there's an example of the two districts in the Philadelphia area, one of which is low resourced and one of which is high resource. And the one with high resources has all kinds of things that kids are doing after school, and they're learning skills and so on and so forth. What are the kids who don't have those things? They're out wandering the neighborhood, getting into trouble. It's a problem. And finally, safe, economically integrated neighborhoods and supportive social interactions are much less than they were 50 years ago. Then there's unregulated marketing. This is one that we have a paper that we're going to publish soon, I hope, that documents the degree to which harmful marketing is contributing to deaths. And here's a list of the deaths from tobacco, pharmaceuticals, alcohol, unhealthful food, guns. We do not regulate this marketing, and as a result, we have these kinds of outcomes. And this should be counted as an important social determinant of health. And it's not really on the list. And the paper we're publishing, we hope we're publishing, will document the degree to which that's a problem. So let me give you a brief history of the evolution of capitalism in the United States. In 1970, there were 1,900 bombings of businesses in this country. Business was reviled by many, many people. And the business community had every reason to be concerned about the future of business and capitalism. Lewis Powell, who would soon become appointed to the Supreme Court, was on the boards of many of these organizations, including Philip Morris. That's another story. I'm an expert witness in the case against Philip Morris, but that's another story. So Lewis Powell had a neighbor who was the chairman of the Education Committee for the Chamber of Commerce. Powell wrote a very insightful memo about the degree to which business was having problems. And he argued that the business community need to come together, and it wasn't sufficient for a company to simply advocate for its interests. Businesses needed to come together to advocate for business per se. And they found a unifying theme, which was the invisible hand, the notion that if in a free market, everyone pursues their own economic well-being, they will be motivated to innovate, to get cheaper and better products. And there's some truth to that. And if you don't think that a free market has any value, then you should hand in your cell phone, because I submit that we wouldn't have them except for the competition in a free market. But it is not inherently the case that if you pursue your own well-being, it will necessarily benefit everyone. I'll come back to that. But the notion was that the pursuit of economic gain will necessarily benefit society. And that led to the forging of, the memo led to the forging of a large network of organizations and the resulting diminution of our communitarian values. And if you really want to know about that, you can read Jane Mayer's book, Dark Money, which documents the degree to which millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars have been poured into the development and success of the conservative business interests, and the creation of the Federalist Society, which now has 5 members of it on the Supreme Court. I could go on, but it will take too long. I'm a fan of selection by consequences, of behavioral background. Any of you have a behavioral background, you're interested in selection by consequences. Well, here's an example of selection by consequences, because if I press the right button, that was the wrong button, we'll go back, we'll press the right button. And here's what happened. This is the percent of wealth that was owned by the top 1/10 of 1% of the population. And what you'll see is that in 1970, Powell wrote that memo. Here's 1978. And what you see is that because of the advocacy for free market economics, these groups tried one thing and another, and what worked they kept, and what didn't work they didn't keep, and they just evolved increasingly effective ownership of society. And this only takes you to 2013. This doesn't include the tax cuts that Trump put in, or the tax cuts that Trump may add if he gets back into the White House. Selection by consequences. Selection by consequences is an important principle in understanding the evolution of cultural practices as it is understanding the behavior of individuals. So this is a figure that is in a paper that we are pretty sure is going to be published. There was a reviewer who many of you know, I won't say who wrote a 1-paragraph review saying, I wouldn't change a word of it. And then the other one had some changes, and we made those changes, and we're still waiting, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be published. And Ron is a co-author on this paper. So the argument here is that, I guess I got a point here. Okay. The argument here is that, yes, we're all concerned about disability and premature death. And here are a set of risk factors that NIH has been funding a lot of effort to try and affect these risk factors, as well they should, and to affect physiological processes that lead to disability and premature death. But what has been ignored in terms of the priorities of NIH in studying these things, and it's beginning to change, is that poverty, discrimination, harmful marketing, toxic physical environments, diminished quality of schools and neighborhoods, and inadequate access to healthcare are all risk factors that are driving these things. And if you only focus on these things and you do not change these, we're going to have a limited impact on these kinds of problems and therefore premature death. And in addition, I would argue that it is public policy that has increased poverty and discrimination and harmful marketing. The regulation, I mean, we've known for at least 40 years that more than 400,000 people a year have been dying of cigarette smoking. And it's only in the last 20 years that we've made some significant progress in reducing the marketing of cigarettes. Okay, so public policy and premature death. This paper just came out, and it modeled the association between working age mortality rates, this is people of working age, and state policies from 1999 to 2019. And what they found was that more liberal policies on the environment, gun safety, labor, economic taxes, tobacco taxes in a state were associated with lower mortality in that state. In other words, policies relevant to each of these issues was an independent predictor of mortality in those states. So the blue states and the red states, they actually differ in policies, and they differ in the rates of premature death. But, you should also know that conservative marijuana policies are associated with lower mortality. I come from a state where marijuana is legal. It's a little hard for me to understand, because I'm pretty sure that liberalization of marijuana is correlated with red and blue states. So how that could be the case, I don't know, but this is what the data show, in case you're interested. There's also research that shows that the correlates of congressional districts with election deniers, these are the correlates of election deniers. This is the correlation between congressional districts that have election deniers in the House of Representatives and predictors. Recent large increases in non-white population in the district was associated with increased likelihood that that district would have an election denier. Low levels of education was also correlated with election denying. Loss of jobs was correlated with that, as was high levels of deaths of despair. And so, and this is a reference to where that came from. The low levels of, I think this is important for understanding what we have to do in this country, and I'll come back to that. So we have tended to focus on communities. And when I say we, I'm talking about myself and Andrew Bonner, who will raise his hand if he's, you know, and he's, Andrew Bonner works in part-time for Values to Action, which is the nonprofit that I created by taking $5,000 a month out of my retirement funds. Capitalism has been very good to me, although it's diminishing. And Andrew and I have been working together for about 3 years. And this is the first time that I met him in person. So this is a wonderful experience. And so we've concluded that we need to focus on communities. A careful reading of the state of the political system in this country suggests that as a nation, we're in for years of conservative control of the federal government and the governments of many states. So I have a Packer and Pearson book, Let Them Eat Tweets, if you don't believe me, but probably when you watch TV on Tuesday night, you'll believe me. If this happens, it will be impossible to implement policies and programs that can increase nurturance at the national level or in those states. And so we feel that we can evolve islands of nurturing communities that lay the foundation for evolving a more nurturing society. We think it may be tractable to work at the level of communities to bring about the kinds of changes that are needed, such that there are increasing examples of this and increasing numbers of communities that are showing how they can work together to improve the well-being of every person. And by the way, this has to include rural white communities, because the data I showed you earlier indicate that we have got to address the needs of those people. If you read Rebooting Capitalism, my last chapter is about politics, and I take the Democratic Party to task for the things that they did. All the people who lost jobs in Ohio and so on lost them because of free market economic theory that the Democrats embraced. And so we're paying for those mistakes. So I think we have a fundamental values choice. And you know, there's evidence that shows that the values that were endorsed by incoming freshmen in universities, for over 40 years, they have done a survey of incoming freshmen in colleges, and they asked what their values were. And there's two kinds of values that people will normally choose. One is a set of pro-social values. I want to grow as a person. I want to help other people and so on. And the other is a more materialistic set of values. I want to be rich. I want to be famous. And there is a graph, which I don't think I have in here, which shows how they crossed. Just as they started advocating for free market economics, more and more people said, I just want to be rich and famous. And so a society in which our highest value is the enrichment of the individual has become the dominant value in this country. And that was not true 50 years ago. One of Putnam's other books documents the degree to which the society was far more pro-social in terms of cooperation across a wide variety of measures. And so it's a choice between values of self-enrichment or a society in which we value the well-being of every person. So let's see. And I would also say that science can't tell us what our values should be. However, it can tell us what the consequences are of our chosen values and what those consequences will be for ourselves, for those around us, and for society as a whole. So I see the choice of values as fundamental to the changes that we need to achieve. So we published a paper a couple of years ago called the Nurture Consilience, basically arguing that 50 years of biobehavioral research converges in showing that people thrive in nurturing environments. They're happier, they live longer, they have fewer conflicts and less violence. Nurturing communities do four things. First of all, they minimize toxic biological and social conditions. Toxic biological conditions like living near, well, high levels of airborne lead or living near a waste dump, but also the toxic social conditions of conflict, and in particular of coercion in families. That's a well-established predictor of the development of a whole range of problems. And so we need to reduce toxic biological and social conditions. And this is an example of that from a paper by Miller, Parker, and Chen that was published in Psych Bulletin, I think in 2011. And what they document is that the degree to which a child experiences coercive interactions, aversiveness, and dad is being firm, but he probably wouldn't be called a child abuser with what he's doing. But the chronic exposure to these kinds of interactions are associated with epigenetic changes and post-translational modifications and tissue remodeling that changes the physiology of the individual and contributes to heart disease, tumor growth, and frailty syndrome. And this process is one of the things that we're arguing in a paper we've actually a paper I'm working on with Denny Fishbein, and maybe I'll rope Andrew and Ron into helping write that paper. That's basically saying, if you do not pay attention to the social stressors that people are experiencing, you're going to have a limited impact on improving well-being and reducing health disparities. So then there's nurturing communities. The second thing about the nurturance is that we need to ritually reinforce all kinds of pro-social behavior. And I'm not talking about M&Ms and stickers. I'm talking about the cooperation and kindness and learning and listening to people and helping people develop their skills, all of the kinds of things that people need to thrive. And lastly, no, not lastly, I got one more. Nurturing communities limit influences and opportunities for problem behavior. Influences like harmful marketing, the marketing of cigarettes and so on, I've already talked about. But also opportunities for problem behavior, like kids home alone without adult supervision after school, who it's been documented is a context in which they're significantly more likely to develop all kinds of problem behavior. The last one is to promote psychological flexibility, which is a values-focused, mindful way of pursuing our values. How many are familiar with the work of it on acceptance and commitment training? Okay, well, you're going to get a little dose of it here. So anyway, so if we choose to pursue nurturance, we think we can promote nurturance through a common vision. And this is an example of what we found in Newberg, Oregon, when a dear friend of mine read The Nurture Effect and created Nurture Newberg. And then when a couple years later, when quite recently conflict developed in the community, we started by asking everybody to answer the very same questions that I asked you to answer. Let's see what you said.
Stop sharing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. There you go.
Hold on, sorry.
You got it.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay. So what did we say here? Let's see. Diversity, number one. Laughter, equity, kindness, caring, smiles, help each other, together, fulfilled, music, vulnerability, be active, connected, safety, humility, compassionate, positive interactions, community centers. There aren't a lot of negative things in this. And you've all come up with a lot of pro-social things that we want to see more of in our communities. So what we're interested in doing, let's see. I'm going to go back to here. Okay,
Perfect.
thank you.
One more thing. Sorry. No, there you go.
Okay. And by the way, that question came from the good behavior game, the PACS good behavior game, which is in 50,000 classrooms in the nationwide, where they ask kids, what do you want your classroom to be about? And then all the things they do in that classroom builds on that. So the dead poster, it becomes something that teachers use every day to say, oh, well, we're going to lunch now. What do we want to see when we're going to lunch? And ask the kids. And it's a highly participatory approach. So a mindful approach to valued living, psychological flexibility. So here's what I'd like to do. This is a commonly used system of helping people to think about what they aspire to. And so what I'd like to do is I would like to ask you to answer the question, what thoughts and feelings might move you away from the aspirations that you have? What behaviors might you engage in that would move you away from it? And then what strategies might help you to hold the left side of this map with awareness? In other words, okay, here are all the things that would help cause me to move away from trying to have the community you want. And what strategies, so you're looking at these, which is what ACT teaches us, that we can notice these things without necessarily believing them, and in that context, do what we choose to do. So we get to do a second thing. So if you get your phone out, what thoughts and feelings about people you disagree with might move you away from pursuing the change you want to see? Pardon the typo, but it was 5 o'clock in the morning. So, and the reason I asked that question is because I'm convinced that when you, well, notice what you think. Think about somebody that you really disagree with, and notice what you think and what you feel around that, and how much you want to argue with them and tell them that they're
Tony, I
wrong.
think we're getting the same question of the original,
Yeah.
not this question. I don't know what happened.
I tested this and tested this.
I think you just need to go to the next slide in Mentimeter.
Try this one. What does this take you to?
Same thing.
Really?
Yeah.
All right.
We can try.
No,
Suggestion.
no, that's okay.
No? Okay.
Let's do this. Let me come back to to this question. Let me just ask you to think about the thoughts and feelings that come up for you when you think about somebody that you really disagree with. And when you have a sense of those, would you just raise your hand? If you have some strong thought or feeling about that, would you just raise your hand? Okay. All right, so what I'm going to ask is somebody to volunteer, because you may not want to do this, and this is why it would have been better to do it with the Mentimeter, and it would be all, But would somebody be willing to share the thoughts that come up when they think about somebody they really disagree with? And we're talking about the kinds of politically charged stuff that everybody's concerned about. Anybody willing to volunteer? Then I'll call on Ron.
Let Albert do it.
Yeah, I'm the extrovert, so.
What is it?
And I'm the extrovert, so just ask anything.
He just asked, yeah.
Okay.
So what is your feeling towards somebody?
Well, I think that person is very selfish, that just thinks of him or herself, and that is not acceptable.
Okay. Somebody else?
That they're not capable of change.
They're not capable of change. Okay.
So why bother?
Well, that's the behavior, right? I mean, if you think that, what are you going to do? Nothing, right? Okay. Come on.
They're inflexible and
We're all-
stuck in the past.
No, By the way, I'll turn up my hearing aids, but don't be afraid to shout.
They're inflexible, stuck in the past, rigid, unwilling to consider or entertain new ideas,
And what behaviors might that induce in you?
just disengagement and avoidance.
So we're not engaged with these people. Somebody else?
Lacking the ability to take someone else's perspective.
Take others' perspectives, right? Okay. Does anybody have,
They believe things that aren't.
to believe things that aren't? Okay. What behavior does that lead to for you?
It could be trying to teach, or it could be ignoring.
Okay. And how about you? What behaviors come to mind for you?
Me, the same, either I'm gonna dig in and try really hard to get them to see a different perspective, or it's going to result in frustration that results in disengagement.
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody have really contrary to the gist of things we've heard?
So like somebody said, rather empathy.
Empathy.
Empathy, yeah. Because somebody has a worldview.
Take his name down. We need him. Because this is exactly the issue. So here's what happened. I can't believe this. You probably know Ron's wife is a minister. And I'm sleeping in one of their beds, and I wake up thinking about all these things. And on the way down here, I'm sitting next to a guy who's a mechanical engineer. He starts talking to me. I don't usually talk to people on planes, right? And at some point early in the conversation, I said something about climate change. And he said, "Oh, Democrat." I just lost Denise Bacon, who helped me in Newburgh. She died on February 21st, and I'm consumed with how I can maybe keep that going, but also just to honor her, right? And I'm thinking about this, and as soon as he said that, I thought of her, because she was so good at listening, and they were having prayer vigils for her, which was funny because she said she didn't believe in God, but she was so good at listening to people. And in fact, the Nurture Newburgh one, the biggest one, is listening. That's 100 people that she asked to do this, but they were diverse people, but they always felt heard by her, and they respected her. And that was so important. And so as soon as he said that, I went, oh, this is a test. And I talked to this man in ways that, are not, you're wrong and so on. So then he tells me that he's a mechanical engineer. His father was a scientist at the University of Alabama. He's a scientist. And he's convinced that it's just the natural variation of CO2. And yes, CO2 is related to heat, but that's just natural variation. And so, okay, listening to that. And we talked about a number of things. And at some point I asked him, do you have any kids? He says he has 3 kids. And he says, what do they do? He says, and he describes one as a veterinarian. I said, my daughter-in-law trains dogs. She has a place called Training Spot where she trains dogs. And so we bonded around dogs. And I said, but my wife and I, we have cats. And he said, oh, I have a cat 19 years old who died. And he's telling me that he told me that he gave me a book about how he brought people back from the dead, how he could he could help gay people by getting the demons out of them. And there was some third thing, but you're probably at the point of going, But what struck me about it was, I was on assignment from Denise that I was going to listen to this person, right? And we had a cordial conversation. And I realized actually this morning when I woke up that we had an experience of common humanity around the things that we both, did. And he mentioned some things that were also, helpful to people. He signed up to help do the census in one of the Indian reservations. He's from Wyoming, and he did it because they wouldn't be counted if he didn't get a good count. So, the guy's not all terrible and so on, but he's certainly on the extreme end of all the things that you're worried about and that I'm worried about. So I don't know. The thing we have to figure out is how we are going to work with the millions of people who are convinced of things we absolutely don't agree with. And do you remember Matthew Broderick's first movie about war? He was a kid and he's playing on a computer and he hacked into a computer and he ends up playing tic-tac-toe with this computer. And the computer finally says, oh, no one can win tic-tac-toe. No one will win the culture wars. It is not worth it trying to fight the culture wars. We have to come to common ground with people, and we are not going to do it by arguing with them, but we might do it by bringing them together around a shared set of values. And so the question is, if you go back to this diagram, the question down here at the bottom is what strategies might help you to hold the left side of this map with awareness and self-compassion while acting in the direction of what matters to you. So in other words, okay, you have all these thoughts and feelings about this person who has these beliefs that you don't like and so on. And can you notice those and accept that you have those? But what would help you to be self-compassionate toward yourself about this? But at the same time, what could you do that would move you in the direction of the values that you specified? I won't change it, but you've seen the values that you specified. Any ideas about that? I'll put this one up.
I think attributing someone's viewpoint that differs from yours, I think a lot of times it's because you think they're not educated or they're some is or phobic or something. I think attributing it to they might have a different experience. If I had that experience, I might feel like they do. And so it's not necessarily a sign of their character or their worth as a person if they don't agree. It could simply be just different experiences.
I think the evidence is on your side. I mean, the correlations I showed with low education and so on, but it's also people who feel threatened. One of the developers of acceptance and commitment therapy has a slide of a bunny, and it says, it's better to miss lunch than to be lunch. And that is a fundamental evolutionary fact about all species, that the first priority is to not get killed. And that bunny that was so busy eating the veggies that it didn't notice the coyote coming up, that's an ex-bunny and didn't pass on their genes. And so we're all inclined to do this. Mark Zuckerberg, it was already known, but Mark Zuckerberg figured this out, that if there was threat in a message, you were more likely to attend to it. You were more likely to pay attention to it. I've got a thing I published on Medium about this saying, if you see something on social media that you disagree with, do not respond to it. Because when you respond to it, tick, that's another person that paid attention to it. So we're going to send that out to more people. The social media are designed to simply forward the things that most people are looking at. And the right wing has been extremely successful in doing this. I got a chapter in Rebooting Capitalism that describes social media and how that works. And by the way, selection by consequences. The people who are making hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars, Alex Jones, making tons of money by putting this stuff out, right? And so the right wing has been far more effective in mobilizing people. And people like us, all the people who raise your hands that you're concerned about this, are not working in coordinated ways. I mean, in Values to Action, we tried to reach out to progressives about the failure, about the fact that corporations were pouring money into election deniers, and we could not get anything going on it. We just couldn't do it. But we've got to figure out how we can create networks of people. What I think, and I was walking around your campus and it came to me that one of the things we have to do is get people cooperating around a positive vision, but you got to have some hope that it's going to work, and it's not going to scare people. That's the challenge. But I hope it can be done. If it can't, we're in deep trouble. So let's come back to that question. this question. What strategies might help you? I mean, think about it in the interpersonal context, but even if you get good at the interpersonal context, there's a woman named Karen Tamarius who's done some good work on how you can talk to people you disagree with, how to train a Trump troll is one of her essays on it. Go to medium.com, Karen Tamarius, and you'll find it. But, you know, so that's at the interpersonal level. We got to get this up to how we can do it as a society. But thoughts, strategies? Why empathy?
I think it shows, like, you know, whenever you have unconditional positive regard for somebody, I think you speak volumes to past their cognition. You're looking at it them on a humane level. And I think that's what people value and want and desire and need.
Yes. And the research shows that. I mean, there's a study in Australia that showed that if you had information about Indigenous people and how Australians are not treating Indigenous people well, this is done in Australia, if the Aussie thinks that that is a message that came from an Aussie, they're more likely to believe it than if it came from a Kiwi or Brit or an American, right? So you have to develop some level of trust before you can have any influence at all. Anybody else? Does anybody have somebody close to you that has completely different views? And, yeah, okay. Well, we can just start at the individual level. If everybody starts doing this at the individual level. Karen Tamarius is one resource for this, and there are others, and we're going to promote psychological flexibility as a way of doing this, right? Okay, so one of the things that Values to Action has gotten good at is creating action circles. We think it's one strategy for to build nurturing communities. And our argument is, if you're not satisfied with the state of your community, action circles give you an opportunity to do something about it. They consist of a small group of people who come together to advance a very specific improvement in the community. So we try and get it down to a very specific thing that can be done in a short order, so you're not having to contribute. By being time limited, it gives you a way to contribute to change that doesn't require you to quit your job, your education, your family, or your recreation. Imagine that we could get thousands of small groups of people working on specific problems in communities where the deal is that we want you for 2 months, we'll meet every other week, and we'll have a very specific goal we're working on. And we think we can move mountains if we can get that organized. And it puts you in contact with like-minded, nurturing people. So thus far, we've had action circles that one was on increasing the use of evidence-based social emotional learning in schools, and specifically the PACS Good Behavior Game and Cooperative Learning, increasing the use of effective reading instruction, which Mark Wiest is going to make us a giant leap forward thanks to his assistance. Increasing the availability of behaviorally skilled personnel in healthcare. People with intellectual and developmental disabilities do not get good healthcare, sometimes because they freak out in the process of getting treatment. Behavior analysts can help kids get the effective treatment that they need. Reforming the juvenile justice in your community. We had a person who just gotten her master's degree, and she was waiting to start a doctoral program, and she said she'd always wanted to do something about juvenile justice. We created an action circle, and in 2 months we have a guide. You can go to valuestoaction.org and you can get our guide to reforming juvenile justice in your community. And we are looking for communities who would like to create an action circle in their community to reform juvenile justice. Regulating harmful marketing. The paper we're writing has been written by members of an action circle. Increasing pro-social value norms and behaviors in community. We're working on that. We'll tell you more about that. And we've done some work on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and Andrew's our expert on that. So action circles consist of 8 to 12 people. They have a clear goal that can be achieved in 2 months and lay the foundation for further progress. So for example, you could have a plan for increasing the availability of family programs in a community. You could have an action circle work on reforming juvenile justice, or implementing a plan for effective reading instruction, getting it adopted. They meet every 2 weeks. Each person takes a small assignment. We've created an action circle just in the last couple of weeks that's working on what Oregon Research Institute can do to increase its getting funding for research on developmental disabilities. Though I think you guys are several thousand miles ahead of us, not just in time, but what you're doing. But I've been impressed with what's going on here. We're going to steal from you. And so the way we think about it is, you start with a community vision that I showed you. Then you get an organizing action circle, an action circle that does two things. It tries to promote community values, norms, and behavior, but it also identifies community change priorities by a careful listing. So the action circle doesn't say what the problems should be. It starts with a list that they think are the problems that are most important, but then we get as many people in the community as possible to vote on which are the most important problems, so that when you have got that done, you've got a lot of people who've already said they want to deal with this problem, and they're going to be more motivated to support the efforts to affect that problem. And then you can organize action circles to address the specific priorities that you choose. And so come back to promoting community values, norms, and behaviors. In Newburgh, we set up a system where people could go to a website and write praise notes about what Ron did that was really helpful, like inviting me here, which is highly praiseworthy as far as I'm concerned. But also recognition via social media and art and community events. But they can also promote psychological flexibility, and that's something we need to get more information about. But the notion is that you could have messaging in media like Triple P does. And Triple P also has tip sheets. And I'm talking to some colleagues, and I talked yesterday to Andrew Gloucester, and we're talking about creating tip sheets based on ACT principles. So you lost your job, you lost somebody in your family died, you had a fight with a neighbor. What are the most common problems that people's lives go off the rail? Let's take the top 10 and do a tip sheet for each one, evaluate it in a series of interrupted time series designs with individuals, and we're getting better at promoting. One of the things that Triple P did is, you can't get your kid to bed, but here's what you can do to get your kid to bed. Well, in the process of learning how to get your kid to bed, you actually learn some more general things about praising the kid and being patient and so on. We think that could come out of these tip sheets as well. And then there's ACT workshops for human service providers and ACT workshops for community leaders. And we're in discussions with the leaders of efforts to improve Indigenous communities in Ontario to use this model. And then there's pro-social development of youth. Every community, we're talking to communities in Sweden, in Ontario, in Oregon, in the Congolese refugee community in Oregon, and some other places. And youth problems comes up in every one of these. Now, I'm not sure that that action circle would end up with them, but that's a distinct possibility. Well, we got stuff on preventing reading failure, which is a huge risk factor. The PACS Good Behavior Game in elementary schools, cooperative learning in middle schools, meaningful roles and activities for youth, reducing access to alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, and reforming juvenile justice. And I would argue that you can name almost any problem of human behavior. And there's, just get out Google and start searching, and you will find evidence. And so we can help communities do these things. And that's about it. And I do have values to action. So if you go to values-to-action.org, you'll learn more about what we're up to. And these are some references. And what the hell? So this is, this came to mind when Denise Bacon died. And it's a question, okay, so Billy Joel had a 7-year-old daughter, and he was breaking up with his wife, and he was concerned about her safety and so on. And this lullaby, good night, my angel, now it's time to dream, and dream how wonderful your life will be. Someday your child may cry, and if you sing this lullaby, then in your heart, there will always be a part of me. Someday we'll all be gone, but lullabies go on and on. They never die. And that's how you and I will be. And I am going to present that in a celebration of Denise's life and argue that she lives on in that, in the things that the people in that community said they aspire to. And to the extent that they're doing things that are promoting those values and behaviors and norms, she will live on. And so that's kind of where I'm at, and I'm done talking, and you're probably glad.
Questions and comments and flexible psychological responding.
I'm going to, this was a very dry talk. So
Yep, yep.
Quick. I'm sorry. I was just gonna ask, maybe I missed it, but you talk a lot about Denise, but I don't really know who she is or.
Denise, so there's this foundation, Ford Family Foundation, different Ford. This is an Oregon foundation. And I had a friend introduce me to the head of their work in communities. And I go, I'm going to the Ford Family Foundation. They're going to start, funding me, right? So I talked to them, and I mentioned I was working in Yamaha County where Newburgh is. He says, oh, well, we have a community organizer there. You should go talk to her. So it's like I go in the front door, I'm out the back door in 10 minutes, and this and so I say, okay, I'll, I arranged to meet her. So I go to this coffee shop one morning, and it took us about half an hour to realize we were sitting at adjacent tables, right? So I give her a copy of this book, and we had a nice conversation. I didn't think anything about it. About 3 months later, I learned that she has created Nurture Newburgh. I love this woman. And when a conservative member of the school board raised some concerns about the edict that had come down from the state about teaching about racism, he was shouted down by the progressives on the school board of being a racist. Well, he's a pretty popular guy in the community, and the community mobilized, and they got some other conservatives to run for the school board, and they took over the school board. And they fired the superintendent, who was an excellent superintendent. I worked quite a bit with the school district, and subsequently their person in charge of instruction quit. A great principal quit, So Denise and I started working on, well, how can we bring people together? And we started to do this, and we've gotten to the point where there were a lot of people participating, not only in specifying those values, but also in promoting those through praise, recognition, and so on. And we were about to have a meeting where she was going to pick about 15 judiciously chosen people that we would explore their getting into an action circle to move forward on this. And then she came down with COVID. We thought she'd recovered, but she had an immune disorder. Her lungs went. She was in the hospital in intensive care for like 3 weeks. And on October 21st, she died. And so that's who Denise is, and she lives on, and what I will do, because we've learned so much about what we can do in communities. But how's my data? Much more research is needed. We used to have a t-shirt at ORI, more research is needed. So
Tony, this notion of first order change, we do things because we just keep doing them the same way, like and advisory boards. And I'm a part of a lot of them, and we meet quarterly, and maybe they have the right people in the room, and maybe something changes from them. But, could we pivot instead to these action circles? I think that could be a pretty powerful pivot for a lot of the work that we're doing.
when I talk to academics, I compare action circles and committees, and people immediately go, right? I mean, how many committee? I mean, this has been it's been really trouble with ORIs. It's trying to deal with how we could get more funding. And I've been in meeting after meeting where, they read the minutes of the last meeting and discuss what was discussed, and everybody has ideas, but nobody actually has anything to do. So I was pushing to create an action circle on increasing health disparities. We created that 2 weeks ago with about 5 people. And one of the things we need to do is get on top of all of the health disparities research that's being funded by NIH. We've already got a bunch of stuff just one of the people spent an hour on it. We got another who's an economist who's trying to get it. What are all the measures that are available on communities such that you could have a profile of that community? And she's already come up with a list of those. I mean, there's a lot of work left to be done on that. Other things we want to do are get in contact with the disadvantaged communities in a way that they feel like they're being heard, that they're being listened to, and so on. There are very high levels of premature deaths among the 9 tribes in Oregon. And so I reached out to a friend of mine who's a head of public health in one of those tribes and said, might you be interested in some help? And now I'm going to be talking to the Oregon Health Authority about that, and hopefully we'll come forward with some things. And the guy who was doing the disparities, the NIH disparities work, I mentioned that, and he wrote back and sent me a link to a night of funding relevant to health disparities. So yes, action circles with specific goals, and everybody has something small to do, you can get a lot done. But you still have to go to the department meetings, sorry.
She's our department chair, so she's gonna change the
That's right, thank you, thank
strategy.
you. But we do task forces. It sounds a little bit like a task force, but I love the idea of even just the name, the action circle. And so I think about in my own research, just identifying those critical individuals who have vision and sort of novel perspective. So I do a lot of community-based research. So it's really about identifying community leaders,
Yes.
those embedded within the front lines of the work we're doing to truly make a difference in a way that's adoptable innovation, sustainable innovation. So when you think about it, I mean, most individuals don't have the time, like you said, to quit their day job.
Well, I mean,
these sort of
the-
small, specific sort of action points.
But, the NIH, I mean, there's increased sensitivity on NIH to this. The paper that I said was probably coming out, I sent that to David Murray at the Office of Disease Prevention, and he sent it to work groups that are working on these things. They're making some progress. But the problem is that if you seriously want to do research in disadvantaged communities, I mean, I found myself writing an email to people in Values to Action about the Tuskegee study. I mean, there are plenty of good reasons, including, you did a very nice study of the risk factors in a disadvantaged population and published it. Well, that's helpful, but it didn't really help the people in that community. So there's not a system set up to develop the relationships that we need. And NIH is also putting more effort into developing the careers of people in disadvantaged populations. So there's a lot to be done, and hopefully for at least the next 2 years, NIH will be able to continue to work on those things. Did they get lunch?
We got a couple more minutes.
Okay, well,
Be interested to hear not just questions, but sort of issues that are on your mind in these times that you see some linkage to some of the constructs that Tony's done, like flexibility, like his conversation with the guy on the plane, where you diametrically opposed in term and completely you can't relate to either position. The people, how do you cope with that? That's I think that's probably an everyday experience for a lot of us, maybe with some of our relatives and friends and neighbors and so on. What are some thoughts about just that process that we're all going through right now? Because it wasn't always as acute, or weren't always as aware of this, even though it's probably always going on, these issues, these processes. But we're now particularly sensitized because of millions of people. Trump didn't help, didn't hurt to galvanize people on both ends of conceptual spectrum. What are some of your observations about that?
I was thinking about, I think in this room there's, perhaps all, or at least some of us are speaking. to
A little louder, please.
Sure, I think that maybe we have some assumptions in this room that we have shared values, those of us sitting here. And that some of those risk factors you showed are things we would want to intervene on. And I'm curious about in communities where maybe the majority of people don't share those values or don't want to intervene on those values in the way that I would want to intervene on them. Where do we stand? What does an action circle look like in that type of community?
Well, I think it remains to be seen. I think I think people share the same values. I'm not very worried about that. But what they want to work on, I'm open to whatever they want to work on. I think that the process of people cooperating to do some damn thing in the community is to the good. But I trust that they're going to come up with things that are genuinely in the interest of the community. I mean, you know, I'm not going to be a consultant to the KKK, and by the way, I am acutely aware that I'm white, and I've done 40 years of research that, you know, got me a lot of publications and showed things that work, damn it, but did very little to get those things, you know, used, which is why I created Values to Action, to actually try and make a difference. So we'll see.
I think one of the beauties of action circles is that it starts with, well, they're composed of community members themselves. So it's not like us going in community saying, here are our values, and here are the things you should work on to improve your community. That is like the opposite of what it is. Composed of community members. And the first thing we do is ask them about their values. And so the word clouds that are produced are explicitly their values. And from there, right, then it becomes a process. What problems do you see in your community, or what do you want to work on? And so I think the nice thing about action circles is that they are grassroots approaches, community-driven, community-led approaches to improving well-being in the community by those community members.
And I didn't show the circle that came out from the Indigenous community leaders in Ontario, but it's consistent with the things that you've seen.
So yeah, we have a project right now with the Congolese refugee community in Oregon, composed of Congolese refugees in Oregon, and coming together around a shared vision of those community members. And so it's not as much where do we stand if we share different values, it's what are your values? And that's the sort of leading edge of all the efforts that flow from those values, you know?
It is.
No, is that not, what do you,
I'm wondering what my community would
which community view are you referring to?
say. My neighborhood, which I prefer not to.
Oh,
name.
yeah.
I wonder what my community members would name as their values,
Right.
and whether I might identify some of those values as.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to ask?
Yeah, right.
Would I be willing to? Probably not.
Yeah. It's like,
I don't know that I currently have standing.
yeah, the interesting thing about the word cloud from Newburgh, Oregon. So it's got over, I want to say we have like hundreds of community members contributing to that word cloud, and the words on that cloud are not changing. More and more people who contribute from across the political aisle, for example, doesn't seem to change what the values are.
our managing director, who's been taking the data and updating the word cloud, sent me an email and he was really upset. Some guy had put in the positive things and they were just fine. But we also asked, what do you want to see, hear, feel, and do less of, which we do not make a word cloud. And he said, this guy said he wanted to see less of that Black Lives Matter crap. And to me, that was an indication that, look, people with different points of view on certain things can come together around a positive set of values. We have to change the subject, not argue about these things, because they're winning those arguments with social media that's frightening all these people and making them angry and so on. It's not bringing anybody together around things we need to do. We need to change the subject. If Biden is successful, he will have a significant proportion of people who have been spending their time in the militias and so on and so forth, have jobs and green, energy and stuff like that. And maybe some of this stuff will diminish. I'm not saying that we shouldn't enforce the law. And in fact, the New York Times had an editorial yesterday about the need to enforce the law. And there's much to be done on that. And you've probably heard about the threats to the synagogues in New Jersey. I mean, this is real to me. My wife is Jewish, but still, I think the only way out of this is to bring people together around positive values and positive actions. But if you want to do your neighborhood, I can set you up.
I'll think.
Well, it's an interesting issue because I live in a cul-de-sac. I've lived there for 30 years. There are 6 houses. So I'm reading about communities and doing things in communities and going, I don't even know all my neighbors in this cul-de-sac. So I decided that I'd invite everybody. I had to get their names in some cases and email them some. And they were all interested and we all got together and we had a potluck. And the guy who lives next to us used to do fabulous Christmas lights. And he had stopped doing them when his kids went away. He agreed to do them. I volunteered. We're going to put up the Christmas lights. There's a little community in advantaged communities. People just go to their houses and they don't have to know each other. But that's one of the reasons that we don't have people working together. We got to figure out how to do it. And maybe an action circle, and it'll only take you 2 months, and then you can do whatever you want, and maybe we'll make a little progress. So, and we'll come work in your neighborhood if you want.
On that note, let me tell you the lunch arrangement, and it's flexible. And Tony's going to stay in here, and we're going to give him his lunch so he doesn't starve. But if you're planning to stay, you can go in and get your lunch, bring it back here. If we have enough lunches for everybody. If you can't stay, it's okay to grab your lunch and take it with you.